Hello.
Hello. Thanks for donating a bit of your time to speak with me. If you want to introduce yourself and maybe let us know how you spend your time.
Yes, my name is Christopher William Caballero. I spend most of my time messing with audio and production aspects, making audio sound better, making audio good for people. I also like to spend my time working with plants and humans and making things better, making the energy in the world better. I guess you could call me a WaveJockey, an audio practitioner, many different labels, but hopefully a friend to as many as possible.
Thank you. So can you talk a little bit about your studies of sound and how that maybe affects matter? I know in my studies of cymatics, I've had revelations just as a musician of how sound interacts with physical matter and the implications of that. Can you talk a little bit about your inquiry into that?
Definitely. I'll go a little bit into background. I went to school for audio engineering at a place in Austin, Texas called Tech Institute. It was at a recording studio called Arlen Studios. It was one of Willie Nelson's old places to record. Really cool spot. Really high-end gear, very nice, everything. But the best stuff that I learned there was about the wave in itself. In audio, in a live idea or in a studio idea, there's the original sound which comes directly from the instrument, like a snare drum. You hear that clap, and it's the first sound, so the microphone would be close to the snare drum. But it also gets the sound of the room, which is the reflection of the snare drum all the way around the room, whether it's from the ceiling and one bounce straight to the microphone, or whether it's from the snare drum to the ceiling, to the floor, to the wall, back to the microphone, which is more like a reverb kind of thing. So their audio tends to become somewhat incoherent at points. Now, if you take a whole lot of these and put them all together, it can get kind of noisy, like it is in a live audio type situation. So the object of the sound man, or the sound reinforcement, is to be able to accurately reinforce the audio, at the clearest possible, and make it coherent with each other. Sometimes a bass guitar and a kick drum will fight over the same frequency range, and it's hard to distinguish what's happening clearly at what time. So there's different ways we have to do that. In the whole cymatics thing involvement, I realized that you can take a plate, a plate, and attach it to a speaker and play a certain sine wave. All right, this sine wave will resonate this plate or resonant object, this dish, and if you put sand in it or small particles like that, it can start to arrange itself into different patterns. Well, certain frequencies produce certain patterns. Certain frequencies in conjunction with the resonant plate produce certain patterns, right? At certain frequencies, it's very fine and very detailed edges and stuff like that, and that would be a very coherent field. Whenever you're sweeping through the frequencies, though, you might find that sometimes it gets really jumbled and it looks very scattered. Now that can be an idea of a very incoherent frequency when it comes to that speaker, that resonant surface, and everything else involved, what you had for breakfast that morning.
So what does that mean, based on the assumption that the fundamental stuff that the universe is made of is ultimately vibration, is ultimately energy taking on denser forms that we call matter? What are the implications of the findings of cymatics, where we find that energy, when resonating at a certain frequency, creates a mandala? What, to somebody who knows nothing of cymatic studies, what are the implications of that to a normal human?
I think there's several implications. Just directly in my line of work, it can be a visual aid. I think visual aid for teaching, helping to learn about audio. And there's a few physics professors that I know that talk about using certain things like cymatics to visually represent the wave in what they're talking about. and learning some physics stuff. So I think the learning implications there are awesome. But aside from that, I think that it shows a little bit more into like cellular structure of everything. I say, I would immediately think of humans, but anything, a dog, a deer, a clay, a Chris. If there can be resonance that activates a certain space, right? Meaning the speaker would activate this resonant plate, and this resonant plate vibrates the sand on top of it. So the plate itself is being activated by the sound. If you can activate certain things at its resonant frequency or any harmonic of that, to where the resonant material or source vibrates with it, it's giving it energy, generally a larger output energy with a very little input, which is really awesome. What they would call is closer to free energy. Right? I think that the electromagnetic fields of everything, like the Earth, or the sun, or the moon, anything, a body of water, a cell phone tower, these things can either be good or they can be bad, just depending on what kind of charge they're holding to it. If it's resonating at a certain frequency that would be very off to your body, and then therefore just like on the plate, it would be a nasty picture. It wouldn't be very defined lines at all. It would be very scattered looking. That electromagnetic field or any other kind of field can mess with the body, either make it good or make it bad. So I think it's really cool to know that this can happen, and that's a very good visual aid, both art-wise and scientific-wise, to be able to see that this happens. And this is a very, very simple way, I would say, to see that it happens.
I read a Sufi quote the other day that said, "He who knows the mystery of sound knows the mystery of the universe." So, like I was saying earlier, there seems to be a correlation with the movements, the macrocosmic movements that the universe is making, and say a symphony. And it's my also understanding that the solfeggio tones that were, so A being the relative tuning of all music, the solfeggio key of A being 432 hertz.
Yes.
And it's my understanding that our current music, that the current standard tuning, concert tuning that we're using for A is 440 hertz. At an experiential level, what is the difference in, say, the human experience of a song in 440 hertz as opposed to 432 hertz? Is there any experiential difference therein?
It really does depend on the key of the song. The different tunings, it can translate a little bit differently. Like the 432 was a tuning that got changed in Europe and in America at a different time, and I don't think that India went with that as much. So there are different feels to that. I think that the 432A note frequency definitely has a little bit better feeling. Through some tests, I've found that it can activate certain parts of the body, certain parts of certain organs and things like that, just by sound resonance, just like we're talking about with the cymatics. So that is awesome. I've also experienced 440 to work on certain organs and certain parts as well. As for the listening experience, I really do think it's dependent upon the song. I think if more songs were written with 432, with the old tuning in mind, there would be a little bit better way to differentiate, better listening reference to be able to check out.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you found the 440 hertz standard tuning to operate within the body in different ways? Because it's in my inquiries, I've found that each energy center or chakra, which in Latin just means spinning wheel, is resonating at a certain frequency that when emitted in one's environment can harmonize that energy center. So what's the relationship of, say, something like solfeggio tuning or dissociative tuning, for example, 440, in the energy centers?
The energy, there's the main energy centers, the main ones that we talk about. They're along the governing vessel area, right? And those would be like the chakras, right? Like the Indian style chakras, which are major control centers for the bioenergetic field and the different energy pathways on the body. But just as it says, a moving wheel, right? The chakra is a moving wheel. There's chakras at every other point in the body as well. Every time that there's a nerve that splits, there's a chakra. There's a wheel of energy because of how energy flows, and when it decides to go somewhere else, it kind of twists and follows with that. So different frequencies can work differently with different organs. Say the size of your liver may be different than the size of somebody else's liver. Now that resonant frequency can actually change, whether it is a point something of a frequency or a whole number of frequency itself. So it really is dependent on each individual person, each individual material that you're trying to resonate or trying to activate via sound. So while the main centers are more active to the solfeggio type tuning, there are definite other parts of the body which can benefit from different tunings, such as the A440. Not a whole lot in my experience, but there are some.
I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you, you were talking about meridians earlier.
Yes.
And just touch a little bit about your knowledge of the meridians. I know your studies in kinesiology are closely correlated with that. So I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about your knowledge of meridian systems, subchakras, and implications for one knowing about something like this, and how one can utilize knowledge like this.
How to utilize knowledge like this, that's very interesting. There's been, in the audio industry, there's been, in the digital world, everything's gotten a little bit more cheap. It's quite a bit more inexpensive. So to be able to mess with audio in a production, in a professional production type standards with the professional tools that we use to manipulate audio and waves, anywhere from music production for the radio or TV to finding oil. Auto-tune was originally created to find oil, so there's many different implications here. I think that using audio to help the body is different, because sometimes what can feel good may not necessarily be what's good for a certain part of the body, for a certain chakra, or for a certain organ. A lot of the organs that we're trying to manipulate don't have nerves attached to them for the feeling aspect. They're just for the information of the brain to say I'm working, I'm not working, or help. But I think that it can be used with a little bit of practice toward the subject. Like someone like yourself, with background in audio, can use these frequencies and use these ideas to create music thusly. And spreading the word is also really good, which I know you're doing. Thank you. The meridian scale, the meridian lines, the meridian map on the body, is how I see it is just energy flow points, energy flow pathways, energy points and swirls, like I said, break-off points that carry information throughout the body, whether it's information for an organ to keep working, or whether it's information for a certain part of the biofield to keep working.
And by biofield, do you mean a non-physical counterpart?
Biofield, when I say biofield, a hippie might call it something like an aura. A scientist might call it something like a bioplasmic sheath. a simple way I like to think about it is if everything that's electrical has a magnetic field due to the law of electromagnetism, law as we see it right now of electromagnetism, because we are electric, we have a magnetic field. So this magnetic field is the aura or the bioplasmic sheath. Now the aura, the bioplasmic sheath itself, can tell us a lot about how the body is functioning. We'll say the liver, if the liver is functioning correctly, the liver meridian point will test on, and hopefully as many points along the line, the liver lines, as possible. And if it's testing on, that's very good. The second way to see if it's testing at a super rate is to see if it has an aura. If its aura is good, that means it's super strong. It's being,
as in testing the space around it.
Testing the space around it correctly. The bioplasmic sheath has a lot of different roles, and I think one of the ones is to help protect us from electromagnetic interference.
Right.
And
Radiation from the sun. And such.
Radiation from the sun, or potential different transmission, radio
Waves.
Transmission waves, microwaves, things of these natures. When we're connected with the earth, when our biofield is coupled with the Earth's biofield, just a little negative charge blanket across the ground, then we're a little bit more protected. We're in line with that. A lot of us wear shoes like with rubber soles and walk on concrete, and we're not really as connected. Yeah, we don't touch as much. So our biofield protecting us from the outside incoherent energetic fields isn't as much of a thing in the ways of medical knowledge these days.
So for somebody who might be confused what you mean when you say test on, can you explain a little the premises behind kinesiology, how you use it?
So there's kinesiology. There's a certain type of muscle testing in where you hold your two fingers together. The tester will put their hands between the fingers like this and try to pull them apart. On the other side of the hand, there would be two fingers. Now we would put these two fingers on a certain localized point, whether it be a chakra point or let's say the liver point, right? Whether we're trying to test an organ, or we're trying to test the biofield, or we're trying to test the biofield energy of what we're drinking or eating, or anything. If the object in question, if the object in test has an energetic field that is holding a charge that is beneficial to the human body, whenever you're pulling apart the fingers, there will be a bit stronger of a connection. Whenever it's holding a charge, whenever it has a field that's holding a charge that's not good for you, or good for whatever you're testing for, then it'll be a weak test. The fingers will come apart very easily. Now there's a few different things you have to do to prepare for this test to be accurate, and you can ask Clay a little bit more about this. But this test is very, we can reproduce awesome results with this test every time. And when I talk about a certain point being on, I talk about a certain point being active. Like when I talk about the liver point, you can test the liver to see if the liver is active or not active. If the liver is getting enough information from the brain to say work, if the liver is getting enough nutrients to say actually do its job, or if there's electrical or emotional interference of information to that liver, to the liver pathways and to the points and whatnot. So
interesting. So to a scientist and skeptic who might say that's just strong and weak muscles, that's not science, how would you respond to that?
There's many different tests and many different clinical research papers that have said this to be true, and this is a very old technique as well. I mean, I think it was latter 70s, and where Dr. Omura from Japan had figured this out a little while back. And if you'd like to see the papers, I can show you the papers.
Right. I guess the proof's in the pudding there.
Yeah, the proof's in the pudding. Whether the papers say or do whatever for you, I found out that it works in my practice. Definitely,
Right.
I've gotten positive results every time.
If it's curing people of polio, who cares?
Correct.
Necessarily verificity of it if it's
Correct.
working.
Though it is a
Verifiable.
real verifiable thing, and it is, the science is all there behind it. The particular science part of it is good information, but again, it's all an application. I like to see it being used a certain way. So if we can use it, let's use it.
Yeah.
And it works great.
Absolutely. So you said at the beginning that you work with plants a lot. How has what vistas has your inquiry taken you into, and to your average American, what bits of information would you say are pertinent to share?
With plants.
Yes.
Pertaining to plants.
Yeah.
Grow local. First of all, just grow. Grow and eat. Like, eat what you grow. It's really good. Very satisfying. Very satisfying. First off, grow local. The things that are native to your area are going to be way easier for you to grow. It's going to take less attention from you. The plant's going to like it more. To actually maybe get the nutrients that it's supposed to get by growing where it's supposed to grow. So all of these things are things that farmers and local grow people have problems with. The compost is supposed to make the soil more fertile and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you start off at the best position possible in the soil it's supposed to grow in, then you've got that much more of a head start. I think growing local, something called partner planting, right? Recently heard of that. Great idea, obviously. Whether it be certain plants keep certain animals away from other plants, planting barriers around that, or whether it be root depth. Certain plants have root depth, this long, and then certain plants have root depth this long. So if you plant them kind of like one and then the other and then one and the other, you're actually getting a bit more soil nutrients and obtainable area. The roots aren't choking each other out as much. Smart planting.
So to somebody who would say a company like Monsanto is doing a great service to the citizens in providing genetically modified seeds to provide more food product, they're doing a great service in providing more food for the masses, and should be revered for that, how would you respond?
I like the idea of providing more food for the masses, as long as the input is not too large for the output. I think a lot of the times nowadays it could be. There's been a lot of recent talk about genetic modification being done to food. And when the original idea, I think, is a good idea. Let's try to make this grow the best possible. I think some of the ways that I've read that things are being done are not up to par. I don't really like the idea of putting animal hormones inside of plants. I really don't even like the idea of putting another plant's hormone inside of another plant. It is quite foreign. I think that there's a lot better science that can be attributed to the way that plants grow and to help plants other than genetically modifying them by now. Genetics has been a thing in the recent decades, and it's been getting stronger and stronger. We've been doing more testing and all that kind of stuff, but I think that it's leading off in a different direction. And personally, not the right direction for me, for my palate. I think that there hasn't been enough testing done on the people who eat the genetically modified foods, the people or the animals who eat genetically modified foods. I have a lot of deer where I live in New Braunfels, and I know that a lot of the farmers will say that the deer will not eat the genetically modified corn. They'll put the GMO corn out, and they'll put the regular corn out, and they'll eat all the regular corn, and there'll be like 1 or 2 kernels missing from the GMO corn, and I think it's kind of apparent there.
So kinesiology is beneficial for localizing a problem. As far as eliminating a problem, I understand that herbs play a huge role in that. Can you fuse your understanding of diagnoses of kinesiology and the application of herbs to cure?
Okay. So we go for cures and we go for diagnosis as just recommendations. Hello. It's just recommendations and just good practice, I think. So resonance matching is the idea here. Whenever a certain herb or a certain food has a certain resonant property to it, right? It's resonating at a certain field, meaning that its aura is at this certain field, right? At this certain field, it's good for a part of your body. Whenever you couple it with your field, right? It should make that part of your body respond positively. So we could do a test beforehand to see, say, if the liver was working correctly, and then if it wasn't, we could bring out something that was good for the liver, that was resonating at that frequency, and then we could put it to the liver point and see if this is making the liver stronger or weaker. And this is the idea with how much maybe you should take food-wise as well, like maybe 1 apricot would be good for your belly, but 2 apricots may not be good for your belly. There's a lot of different uses for the test that I use, and
and at different times during the day, or there's so many variables for each individual.
A cool part of a test like this or other tests like it is that you can test at many parts of the day without it costing several thousands of dollars for an x-ray or to drink a barium fluid.
And these techniques have stood the test of time. I mean, they were seen back in Vedic traditions, is that correct? In ancient India.
Back in Vedic traditions, back in the ancient Chinese stuff. It's common practice in many other places on the earth. I am so grateful that it is becoming more practiced here in America, and I think that's a good thing to focus on.
So why, if in ancient times these practices were seen and they're still seen today, that tells me that these practices are timeless, why has Western medicine evolved away from them?
I think that in the separation of when America was trying to be its own thing, our own thing, you know what I mean? Like we were saying, all right,
the British Empire.
Bye guys, we're gonna go over there. We're gonna do our own thing. I think there was a lot of work in making sure that we were the best, newest thing, and that the old stuff from like the Indians or the taboo kind of medical stuff wasn't going to be a thing anymore. It's it's the new frontier. It's let's do it.
Right.
It's the new stuff. I think that kind of patriotism carried along in the different practices that happen medically and or orthodontically, nutritionally, the way we eat, the way we don't eat, the way we should eat.
So that you're inferring that was a direct result of our starting a new culture?
I think that had a big part to do with it. I think that had a big part in that. I think it could be reviewed at any time, and right now is a really good time to re-review that. Anybody watching?
So what can Western medicine do to start taking steps in the right direction towards a holistic medicine rather than polarized medicine?
The American Medical Association's handbook states that the number 3 Number 3 reason for death is the clinical treatment of a chronic disease. Clinical something being like, okay, I broke my arm. Chronic something being like, okay, I have a liver problem, right? Going to the hospital or going to a doctor for something like a liver problem may not be such a good idea as it's stated in these statistics by the American Medical Association. So I think that, you know, trying to better yourself, you know, as a human by eating correctly, you know, using the nutrients and using the wonderful internet that we have. There's a lot of information that may be censored. There's a whole lot of information that definitely isn't. So definitely use that, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, double check everything you're eating, but get online, check it out.
There.
Talk to your local friend who knows a little bit more about it. Eating correctly, you know, maybe trying a local cough remedy instead of going to Walgreens to get NyQuil may be an idea, you know. Start there. You know, if that cough medicine doesn't work, okay, then you can go to Walgreens and try that. But, you know, start trying the easier things, I would say. The less expensive, the easier things, the prettier things. You know, to go get some medicine, you can go pick a flower or a leaf instead of having to go to Walgreens. I think it's a better...
Just arm yourself with knowledge. So I want to close in asking a hypothetical question, perhaps existential in nature. If you could boil and distill all of the personalities, all human personalities on Earth into one human and sit across from that one human, what would you say? If you had 2 minutes to address that one person that is the culmination of all people, what would you say? What would you want to say to yourself?
That's a very interesting question. I like that. First, I'd like to give it a hug. And probably dance around a little bit. I think that would be really good. I'd want to tell it thank you. I'd want to give us hope and a good idea, a positive vibe to keep moving on. There can be a lot of things that could get you down in the world these days, but so far from what I've heard and from what I've read, that's always been the case. So keep up. You know.
I think the times we live in now are definitely ebbing and flowing and more undulous than they ever have been in human history. I mean, I really do think that there's an opportunity at our fingertips that's never been so close to actualize our dreams.
If it's flopping, you know, violently in either direction, be aware. Be aware when it's bad, but also be very aware when it's good and take advantage of that, you know.
Definitely. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time, and the purpose of these videos are purely to share perspectives. So if you enjoy what you hear, please feel free to share and disseminate. Thanks, Chris.